everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around for what I think will be a really, really exciting panel, a conversation about compassionate leadership. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And we're going to start off with introducing ourselves. I'm going to kick us off, and then I'm going to invite my co-panelists to talk about their organization and a little bit about themselves. So I am Andy Williams. My pronouns are she, her, and I direct the nonprofit portfolio at the Center for Creative Leadership. And we affectionately call ourselves CCL. So you'll hear me talk a lot about CCL. So CCL is a nonprofit leadership development organization. We come alongside leaders to develop, coach, and learn with them because we know that leadership makes a difference, right? For better or for worse. And what we need right now are better leaders to help us navigate the challenging times that we are all experiencing. So as a leadership development provider, we certainly have a point of view about leadership. So at CCL, when we talk about leadership, we're talking about more than just individual leaders. We define leadership as an interdependent social process, that results in three outcomes: direction, alignment, and commitment. So that is a important thing just to keep in mind when we're talking about we need better leadership, because every single person in this room is engaged in the process of leadership. No matter where you sit in your organization or how you work with the communities that you serve, you are involved in leadership. And at CCL, we believe that we can all grow and learn together to become better at it. So now I'm going to invite my panelists to introduce themselves. Frances, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Frances Kuhnreuter. I'm co-executive director of the Building Movement Project, which is a national organization that conducts research, develops resources and tools, and builds relationships with people in order to help and support and encourage nonprofits to engage in social change and systems change. And we do this in a variety of ways. Let me give you some examples. If you happen to go to my colleague Mercedes Brown workshop, we've developed an automated, very accessible racial equity assessment for organizations and consultants. We are having a webinar at the beginning of next month about how service organizations can work to engage their program participants in advocacy and systems change work. My colleague Deepa Iyer works on solidarity. She has a plethora of resources on how communities and movements can build solidarity together. And then we do a bunch of research, including our Race to Lead research, which I'm going to be talking about in a little while.
Thank you. Fred.
Hello. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Fred Riley. I am the executive director of Weave, the Social Fabric Project at the Aspen Institute. In our work, the Aspen Institute is a global nonprofit working to create a more fair, just, and equitable society. And our work at Weave centers on how do we help to support local community leaders who are building trust, compassionate communities, and leading with compassion in the communities they hail from. We do this because trust is at an all-time low in our country. When I think about our work, I always go back to history, and I think about in 1933 when FDR became president, he was hit with the federal banking crisis. Folks had taken their money out of the banks because of the Great Depression, and so he created all these new legislation, but got on the radio for a fireside chat and said, go put your money back in the banks. It's better in banks than it is under your mattresses. And the next day, $20 million showed up in US banks. We don't have leaders who can do that anymore, but I have weavers in communities all around the country who are community FDRs. And if they open their door and tell the community to go in one direction, they go. And so we support them because we believe they are our best chance of healing the divides we have in our country right now.
Thank you. Awesome. Janelle.
Good evening, everyone. We're very clear. We're the last panel before happy hour, so we're trying our best to make sure this is as riveting as your cocktail hour. I really want to thank independent sector for creating an opportunity to facilitate such a timely conversation. I want to give special gratitude to Dr. Akilah Watkins for really centering leadership to drive our work. Thank you, Dr. Watkins. I also want to acknowledge Tanae Traylor, who is co-founder and partner in crime for Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, a nonprofit I'm proud to lead, as well as Courtney Collins, our Chief Operating Officer, who really was instrumental in helping me prepare today and also plays a critical leadership role in setting the culture that we aspire to really live day to day. So what is Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative? It is a catalytic nonprofit designed to build Black wealth. How do we do that? We focus on connecting ideas, people, and capital. What do we mean by ideas? This is a copy of a report freshly minted that we released, Building a Beloved Economy. It's a case study around why we need to talk about Black wealth. Nationally, the white to Black wealth gap is 12.5 to 1. In the city of Atlanta, it's 46 to 1. And when we think about the American South, 55% of Black people live in the American South. And so we are eager to take this research, this narrative, and more importantly, really unearth actionable strategies and solutions to a city near you. So please reach out if you're interested to really talk about why we need to build Black wealth. It's really important that we do this work not only for community, but with community. And so the people is actually the movement building component of this work. So we have an 1,000 Black business campaign. We just launched our Black Community Wealth Network, which is national in nature. And finally, it's really about thinking about how do we leverage catalytic capital to create more inclusive economic outcomes. And so I'm excited to share more about our work, but more importantly, what's a culture to cultivate this work in a sustainable way.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. Just so grateful that they've taken the opportunity to really reflect on compassionate leadership and how that shows up in their work. So I'm super excited to get to ask more about that. But my job right now is to quickly set up what compassionate leadership is and really ground us in why this is important for nonprofit leaders. So I'm just going to take hopefully less than 5 minutes to do that. I certainly could talk about it all day long. I'm incredibly passionate about the topic, so please know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. We will have resources that are available at the end through the QR link that you'll see there, so definitely go and check out those resources for more information. So at CCL, I mentioned we learn with leaders. We study leadership. And the mindsets and skill sets that are needed today are things that we weren't even maybe thinking about in the past decades. And these mindsets and skill sets that we need now are maybe things that have been historically not even valued or named, or in some cases even recognized as important to leadership. My organization has studied leadership for 50 years, and we have been part of the problem in understanding what leadership really looks like, right? I've seen the ways that we traditionally measured quote unquote good leadership. That measurement has come from norms set by and centered on a white male experience who are in business settings typically. And those data missed important capabilities, really important capabilities that leaders like me and you and all of you bring to your practice of leadership in the context where you serve. So we're evolving. We are looking beyond those traditional norms and data sets to really understand the full scope of leadership and the impact through our Better Leadership Project. So we find that one of the things that better leaders have is compassion. So there's a lot of things that better leaders do, but we're gonna really focus in on compassion today. We desperately need compassionate leaders for our future. And compassionate leadership really is about understanding deeply understanding, it's about inquiry, and it's about action, both for ourselves and for others. It's about really paying attention and noticing others' suffering. So being in it with them and then supporting in a manner that is helpful to them. Notice I didn't say fixing it for people. We're not talking about rescuing. We're talking about a human desire, something that is deeply wired within us to cultivate connections and bonds with others. Compassion is absolutely central to our well-being, and compassion is a choice that we all have. So compassionate leadership is about being willing to apply your influence and your power to create better conditions for others to thrive, okay? Compassion is one of the most powerful acts that we have as leaders, and those things can be really, really small. It's in our everyday interactions that compassion shows up, and small acts of compassion are potent. So I'm going to share just a couple of recent research statistics that point us to the way of how compassionate leadership can truly transform organizations. And then we're going to learn from our panelists. So research shows that compassionate leaders are more effective, right? Compassionate leaders are more effective. They are more successful at building trust, at encouraging collaboration, and reducing turnover on their teams. That definitely sounds like something we need. Compassionate leadership contributes to employee well-being and belonging, which in turn help with job satisfaction and productivity and performance. Compassionate leaders contribute to the bottom line. So studies have been done, and compassionate units outperform others in financial indicators. That's something we also can pay attention to, and our business colleagues may also pay attention to that. Compassionate leadership fosters human creativity and innovation. 91% of leaders, when they're surveyed, say that compassion is very important to leadership. And 80% of leaders say they want to be more compassionate, but they're not sure how to do it. So we're going to learn from the wisdom of our panel about how they have been able to cultivate compassion within their organizations and the leaders that they serve. So I'm going to start with you, Fred. So your work focuses on supporting leaders at that hyper-local level. And we know trust is key for doing that, right? And compassionate leadership can help create trust. So tell us more about your work, how you do that, and how you see compassionate leadership building trust in the communities you serve.
Yeah. So Weave, at its founding in 2018 by New York Times author David Brooks, because he was writing about a lot of doom and gloom. And so traveled all around the country. I think he did a 27-city tour. And they would ask a couple of questions before they got there. They would say, who do you trust? And who shows up? And who is the trusted leader in the community? And we would hear these names of folks, and they would be this person who runs an after-school program over here, or this person who feeds the homeless with bagels from our coffee shop, or this person. They weren't the, voted in leader, but they were a neighborhood hero who was like making things happen for people. And so when I took over the work, I wanted to hear from those same people, but I wanted to know how I could make their job better. I feel like we're all climbing a mountain with campers in back of us and a bunch of things in our backpacks. And my role is to take some of the things out of the backpack so they can get up faster. And so we met with about 250 of them around the country. And I wanted to know, tell me some of the pain points with our work and what we can do to make it better. And they said to us, you all are raising money, but none of it comes to us. David Brooks goes on stages and he shares our stories and we get nothing out of it. We need a resource hub because we aren't, like most of these folks don't have an ironed out 501c3. They're doing work because they feel a calling to do this. And so we heard from them, reshuffled our strategic plan and created a funding mechanism so that we could fund microgrants so that they could do their work. We created a resource hub. We created a speakers bureau, and we take 20 of them every year through a training and then begin to place them on stages around the country. we believe that they are the trusted leader in their community and they are the one who can make change. And so we had to like change in our mind what a leader looked like, right? Because I'm a black man, but in my head, I still think a leader looks a certain way. So I have to dismantle that and go with a different theme of what a leader looks like, right? And after we did all of that, we had to like make that become action. And so some of the folks that we're supporting around the country, like Erica Gonzalez in Baltimore, who bought a house in a neighborhood that had an alleyway where you could only find rats and used needles. And she says, I don't want to focus on what's bad about this neighborhood. I want to focus about the beauty in it. So she cleaned up the neighborhood and forced the city to put up a fence. And then she says, can you give me some money so I can build a stage? We built the stage for her, and she hosted the Baltimore Symphony there this past summer.
Beautiful.
Marian Alsop, who is like world-renowned, hosted her in this neighborhood in Baltimore. If you go to this neighborhood, lock your doors and drive real fast. But she is revitalizing the neighborhood, and she's the trusted person. And when people pull up in this neighborhood, they call her to say, who are these folks in the neighborhood? And so compassion is listening, doing meaningful action, and then really making the results happen for the people. Now, Erica Gonzalez just raised $1.4 million to do over 4 more spaces like that in their neighborhood because of the spark of that, because we trusted her. And now she trusts us, and we want to figure out how we can do that with more folks all around the country because they can really drive change.
I love that so much. I'm going to follow up maybe with a question that you can just tease apart a little bit about how you have to approach that work, right? Humbly and not knowing all the answers, right?
Yeah.
So what does that look like as you craft your mindset to approach that work?
I think this job, I worked before I took this role, I worked for about 15 years for YMCAs around the country and YMCA of the USA. So I had a real idea of how I would attack this work. And this is a really different project because these folks are the real experts in the community for what driving change looks like. And so I really have to get out of the way. I really have to every year we hire a group of them as our advisors where we cook things up about 70% and then they tell us the rest of the way. And when this group comes together, like this doesn't look like a typical board. Like, these are folks who live in a community and are giving us advice. And I take their advice because it's sage advice and it's really good wisdom and they understand. Listen, I often tell people that I can't tell people what to do in local communities because I don't know how much eggs cost anymore. When I go to a grocery store, I just throw things in a cart.
Yeah.
I don't look at I'm not saying I'm rich, but real people who live in communities, live on the ground is where they have kids, where they bury people, where they send their kids to school. They should be driving what happens in communities. That was tough for me in the beginning because I'm a know-it-all in some ways, right? But listening to them has really helped our work to flourish because they are the experts and we treat them that way.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And just, again, to point to something that's working, where we see trust eroding in so many places. This is a place where you have really been able to rebuild trust in a way, in a really important way that will sustain those communities moving forward.
We think that if trust is going to be built in this country, if they're going to help, trust is like a thing that kind of like ground swells, right? It's an upswell, right?
Yeah.
And so if it happens in neighborhoods and I trust you as the leader in my neighborhood, and then you teach me to trust the system, we can rebuild trust in this country, but it has to happen that way.
It has to happen one-to-one. Yeah, thank you. So Danelle, I'm going to turn to you now. So we don't often equate compassion with boldness, right? We know that that leadership always starts with ourselves, right? We have to start with ourselves. We can't make the sweeping changes that need to be made without being compassionate to ourselves. Yet many leaders find that challenging, to find the time for self-compassion. Feels counter to what they're doing. So tell us more about what it looks like to be compassionate when you are at the helm of an organization that is pushing bold initiatives, and maybe weave in a little bit about how you practice self-compassion.
Yeah. So I'm going to break this down in a really transparent way, right? I lead an organization focused on building wealth for Black people and Black places, unapologetically. And everyone in this room is also astutely aware of the current climate we are seeing. We are increasingly polarized as a democracy, while we are meeting with scores and scores of people that are saying, I want wealth because I want freedom. And so one of the things that I make sure to be really intentional to emphasize is that I am leading race-explicit work. That does not mean that I am race-exclusive. And it's really, really important to understand that frame. And so when you're leading work to support Black people in environments where we're seeing increasing waves of anti-Black racism, it's really important you have not just a defensible analysis, but you center your work with humanity. And so our work is pro-Black, and that does not mean it's anti anyone else.
Yes.
Okay? So I want to start with that, and I want to level set with that, regardless of where anyone sits on political aisles, right? And so one of the things that I lead with and try to really model for the team is that I will not ask you to negotiate your humanity. And if we fundamentally believe that no one should have to negotiate their humanity, then there's a real intentionality about results and the culture with which this work should be developed. And so what it looks like to lead in these times and with compassion, it requires courage. And that courage really starts internally, because fear has been a transactional, but still a very powerful tactic. And the response to it is courageous leadership. And courageous leadership needs love. And this is why we always talk about shared humanity. And so as we have these conversations as our team, we really delve into what does it mean to do this work, centering on our humanity and with a high standard and expectation of excellence. How do we do this understanding there's an assault on race-conscious work? And I really want to give a shout out to the NPQ Nonprofit Quarterly team, because they've been really lifting up the work of pro-Black organizations and really lifting up the wave of anti-Black racism that is occurring right now. And I want to remind you all, our work is really rooted in the American South, and that has a very unique flavor as well. And so as we think about this, there's a couple of things I just want to lift up, right? That when we're talking about compassionate leadership, how have we developed a culture that it's wedded in our results? And so my KPIs is not only around, okay, did we reach our development goals, or how many publications were produced, but it's also making sure that I thoughtfully invest the emotional intelligence needed because of the emotional labor of this type of work.
Yes.
Because it's really important to acknowledge that for many of us, this is not a scholarly exercise. This is not 3 or 4 degrees of separation. This is deeply personal. And so there's a real emotional labor that this work demands. And so it requires a level of emotional intelligence, so it's done with a high level of integrity. And so for us to authentically ground this work, we're really clear on this. And so when I meet with our team, we have really transparent check-ins on where are you today? How are you really dealing with these headlines? Or your son got pulled over and how that terrified you and how that affected how you showed up on this call with this funder. And for that to be responded with grace and with compassion, because we understand these are not things that people compartmentalize within a 9-to-5 box. This is real experiences that we're talking about. And so that's really important for us. I also have to say that we have to also wire our infrastructure with compassion by looking at what does internal resilience and sustainability mean? Because if I actually am demonstrating compassionate leadership, then I'm going to compensate you for that emotional labor as well. And sometimes that can be, yes, and what your entire, like, your benefits package might look like. We're going to take some days off, early Fridays on the summer, because you need that. Mental health days should be normalized because you need that, right? How do we make sure in our infrastructure, and we're centering it in understanding race explicit is not race exclusive. You're not going to have to negotiate your humanity. There are clear results we have to collectively achieve. And then how do we show up as a leaderful organization? And being leaderful means we also have to share accountability for this work. So those are some really important things, and I know I want to delve in more to this, but I think it's important we have these conversations. And when I have calls with funders, I'm also really clear on this is what a program or project costs in terms of a deliverable, but there's also some real heavy emotional trust building, movement building work that doesn't neatly translate into results or metrics that are very quantifiable.
Yes,
okay?
thank you.
It doesn't work that way. That's just real. And so I also want us to have conversations around how do we really hold the totality of the work. And, you know, one of the things I've encouraged our team to say is, you know, things thrive when they're implicit because there's no accountability. And it allows one to feign ignorance. But when you make the implicit explicit, you can't absolve accountability anymore. So it's important we center the total cost of doing this work and also be really honest about ourselves as leaders around the capacity we need so that we can do it with grace and do it with excellence. And that means a departure from a performative culture. And I'll spend more time talking about this as well because I model with my team and I have to resist the urge, as in case you don't know, I'm a Black woman and an immigrant, to not be the know-it-all because there's very limited margins of error for people that look like me. And so when you have to say, I don't have the answer, that takes courage, but invites an environment to facilitate curiosity. And that's where we can thrive.
Thank you so much. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for giving us so many examples that really, I think, resonated with people in this audience who maybe don't have that type of perspective on leadership at this time, but certainly we can all go back and learn from that. So Francis, we're going to come to you and talk more about some research that you've been doing, really exciting research, and how compassionate leadership might interplay with some of the trends that you're observing from your research. So go in whatever direction you want to go there. There's a lot. I know, there's a lot.
Swimming. First, I just want to thank you for inviting me to the panel, and it's just really an honor to be on with you, Andy, and Janelle, and Fred. And I don't know why they make the data nerd go last. It's terrible. But I'm going to do my best. For those of you who don't know the Building Movement Project's Race to Lead research, let me just give you a very quick introduction, because I'm going to give you some data. And I don't have the visuals to go with it, so you're just going to have to open up your ears and listen to it. So in 2016, my co-executive director and I decided we were going to do a survey. We surveyed over 3,000 workers in the nonprofit sector, and our question is, why aren't there more leaders of color in the nonprofit sector? And the answer was something you all already know, but people of color were equally qualified. They were, they aspired to leadership more than the white respondents. And so the barriers were systemic barriers to advancement. In 2019, we repeated that survey, and we added questions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we also looked at how the race of the senior leadership affects the workplace environment, both for BIPOC and white leaders. All this is on racetolead.org or buildingmovement.org. I'm not going to go into all the findings. And most recently, in 2022, we actually closed at the beginning in January of 2023, but most of the respondents, the over 3,000 respondents, were in 2022. We expanded the survey to ask about the impact of the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd and the pandemic on how people experience their nonprofit work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that data, and I want to talk about it in terms of what the staff were experiencing, and I also want to talk about it in terms of what the leaders were experiencing. So first of all, we collect a lot of demographic data, and it looks pretty similar from 2016 to 2019 to 2022, race and ethnicity, sexuality, gender and gender identity. One thing really changed between 2019, when we first asked the question, and 2022. And that was a question we asked about disability. We just said, do you have a disability? It went from 10% to 20%. That's double. So we thought, we better dig into that. Where was the increase? If you look at the data, in 2019, about 50%, equally divided between BIPOC and white respondents, said that their disability was a mental health disability. That increased to almost 70% in 2022. 69% of BIPOC respondents who had a disability and 68% of white respondents who had disability said it was for mental health. So we're coming into an era, as Andy started describing, and as you all described, where people are coming to our work sites with different needs, and we have to acknowledge these different needs. So we also asked the importance of certain workplace experiences before the pandemic and then after the pandemic. So what we said is, on a scale, it was like a 5-point scale. Was it significantly less important after 2020? Again, we mentioned the uprisings in the pandemic, this experience, or was it more important? And I'm just going to report on what people said was significantly more important to them after the pandemic. Culture of the organization. 33% of BIPOC respondents, a third, and a little less than a quarter of white respondents said that that was significantly more important for them. Personal fulfillment and purpose. 31% of BIPOC respondents and only 8% of white respondents said that was significantly more important to them. All our data is divided by race, just so you know, that's the way I'm going to present it. Addressing equity and justice, 33% of BIPOC respondents said that was significantly more important to them, and 28% of white respondents also. We're doing our job, we're getting there. And then flexible work hours, this is not going to surprise you, 50% of both white and BIPOC respondents said that was significantly more important to them. So we are in workplaces where compassionate leadership is more important than ever. I want to say that there is a little bit of good news from, or maybe it's a lot of good news, between 2016 and 2022, challenges that people faced decreased, the percentage of people who acknowledged or reported challenges, and some of the supports increased. And I just want to give you a few examples. Few opportunities for advancement. 45% of BIPOC respondents said they were challenged by few opportunities of advancement in 2016. That went down to 34%. So 11 percentage points difference, that's a difference. So maybe our compassionate leadership that we've already enabled is starting to have some impact. Inadequate salaries also went down about 13% for BIPOC respondents, and it went down about 17% for white respondents. Also, stress of representing a community, always more challenging for BIPOC respondents, but went down for both groups. I want to also, though, acknowledge that the difference between BIPOC and white respondents still exists. So though it's going down generally, BIPOC respondents always have more challenges than white respondents. So we haven't closed the gap. So we have a lot of work to do in that area. And some supports increase. For example, mentors inside the organization, it increased 6% for BIPOC respondents. It increased 16% for white respondents. And they were already ahead, way ahead. So I don't know what's happening within these organizations. We need more compassionate leadership for sure. And increase in coaching. So we're seeing some increase in the supports. I want to turn to leaders now because the reason it's hard for leaders to be compassionate is because their jobs are so hard. And I just think you gave great examples of being compassionate leadership, but we have to acknowledge how hard leaders' jobs are. So we asked this year, we asked leaders when they came into their organizations, what were some of the challenges that they faced? And I just want to give you some examples. Budget deficits, 35% of BIPOC leaders, 44% of white leaders. I'm not going to give you all the statistics. Low staff morale, staff significantly underpaid. That's coming into their organizations. Okay, so then we said, well, how about staff and board support when you come into your organization? Not so good. For the staff, 37% of BIPOC leaders said that their staff supported them when they came into the organization, and 46% of white leaders. Now, maybe there's a wait and see. You know, that you get a new leader, you're a little nervous. But board support, 49% of BIPOC leaders have board support compared to 70% of white leaders. Huge difference. And so the wait and see is happening with the board, with BIPOC leaders, where it's not happening with white leadership. And then ongoing challenges, I just want to mention a few. Being able to offer competitive salaries. These are over 50% of leaders. I'm not going to give the breakdown on race for these, so I can, for the interest of time, but said that these were issues. Being able to offer competitive salaries and benefits, raising money, dealing with organizational growth, and dealing with the current political climate. And through all of that, 75% of the leaders said that their staff expect them to be nurturing. So you've got all these pressures, and then you also have staff reasonably who want to be nurtured by the leader. So I'm just going to end this section with a quote. We have a million write-ins. They're hard to go through. I'm happy to talk about them. But this is from a BIPOC leader who said, "I'm the right person to provide leadership right now, and I'm keenly aware that a huge function of my role is not what my job description says. It is to ensure our team is well and the work is meaningful and values aligned. The pandemic changed my views of leadership, and I believe that's had a positive impact on our organization." And then she ends by saying, "And it's unlikely I'll continue working in this sector in the coming years." And that is our challenge.
That is our challenge. Wow, thanks for framing that up. Thank you so much. That was so great. So we want to end with a forward-looking question, and we're going to have to do this kind of quick so we can get people to the bar.
No pressure.
So with an eye to the future.
Some are already there.
Thinking about the next generation of leaders, what can we be doing now to prepare the way for them? Maybe share a reflection on what mindset shifts, new data, or strategies that you believe are absolutely essential to our future success in the nonprofit sector. Janelle, let's start with you.
I think we have to tell the full story. I think we have to marry data with truth. I will share in my lived experience, the expectation of a Black woman leading in these times is martyrdom. And I refuse to let my daughter be a sacrificial lamb. So I am speaking truth with data to say we have to change these silent expectations because it's not sustainable. The end of that quote did not surprise me because it's not. So what we have to do is to challenge ourselves to interrogate what does leadership look like in these times, and how do we redefine metrics of success for leadership? And if we're not baking risk into the model, are we doing the right work?
Thank you.
Those are the things we should consider.
Yeah, excellent. Fred?
I would say I think we have to, I'll go back to dismantling what we believe a leader is. You know, the folks who we work with around the country are folks through some great triumph or some great tragedy has turned it into a life's passion, and they're taking that work and changing lives. In Baltimore right now, Hanif Hardy is probably running through the streets with 40 young men. Hanif grew up in Philadelphia, saw both of his parents die through drug addiction, got adopted in the 11th grade, but got a cross-country scholarship and went to college and grad schools. He's a college professor. And he took that grief and that horrible childhood and is running through the streets right now with 40 young men because he says running helps to take his brain to another place, and he wanted to impart that in young people. But we don't see him as a leader. He doesn't get grants, he doesn't get funding, folks don't invite him places to speak. And if we're gonna change things, it's gonna take the efforts of everybody. And so some nonprofits should move out of the way and let some of these leaders who are closer to the issues get in and solve it. That's what I believe.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Francis?
So one disturbing thing that we're seeing in the data this time is on aspirations to be leaders. So BIPOC respondents have always aspired to be leaders more than white respondents by 10 to 14 percentage points, and that's still true. But that trend is going down. Fewer people are saying that they want to be leaders who are not current leaders. And we were looking into this, and we realized what's happening is the people that are in the maybes, they're going into the definitely knows or probably knows. So that maybe is shrinking. It's the polarization of our country, Fred, you know? But that maybe, and we have to figure out how we take those maybes and make them yeses. And I think that what the panelists said today is part of that, being compassionate to them. We also found that if they have opportunities for advancement, if they have mentors within and outside their organization, it makes a huge difference. And I also think we need new models of leading. I'm a co-executive director. I have been for 10 years. Now it's suddenly popular, right? But, and we did see some more of that, but that's not the only model. We have to really think and interrogate how leadership needs to change to make it sustainable for young people.
Awesome. Well, let's thank our panelists. That was phenomenal. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. And I believe we're going to have a QR code where you can go and get more information about everything you've heard today. So whenever that QR code comes up, make sure you check that out. And I think we're ready for the bar, right?
Let's go.
Thank you all for being here and for being here all the way to the end. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you to the Upswell team for everything that you all have done to make this a very life-giving conference. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Awesome.